For example, if you were reading about the Cinder Cone volcano and you read that it's a volcano mainly made up of small rock particles or cinders, you could put that here next to the appearance. And then when you're reading about the Shield volcano, it's made up of layers of lava rock, so you can write that here for its appearance, and then you can use the diagram and the pictures from the textbook to draw a drawing of a cinder cone volcano and a shield volcano. All right, so I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to read with your partner and fill out your criteria chart. All right, so now we're going to talk about a instructional strategy, which is considered a high probability instructional strategy, which means that it is proven to be successful throughout research. And this would be having students identify similarities and differences. And so here's an example of a graphic organizer called the box and T chart, where students can list the similarities between two things that you're studying and then list the differences here. So for example, we just read and you filled out the criteria chart on cinder cone volcanoes and shield volcanoes. So in the similarities box, you would write things about those two volcanoes that are similar. And then in the differences, you would list cinder cone volcanoes here and write things that only cinder cone volcanoes have. And then over here, you would write shield volcano and write things that only shield volcanoes have. And a way to make this kind of silly and fun for the students is, and to help them use the right language when they're talking about these things, would be to call this line here that divides the two the butt line. They all giggle about that and laugh, but it's just, if they call it the butt line, that helps them, talk about when they're explaining the differences. For example, if we were talking about, let's see, if we were talking about like two different types of sharks, like differences would be a hammerhead shark has a head that's shaped like a hammer, but a great white shark does not. So they would show the differences and use that word but to explain the differences. So, and this is a high probability instructional strategy because students are seeing similarities and differences, they're identifying them, they're writing them down, which also helps them process them, and that builds comprehension. So now what I would like you to do with your same partner is you are going to use your criteria chart, what you filled out about cinder cone volcanoes and what you learned about them, what you learned about shield volcanoes, and you're going to be identifying the similarities, the things that they have that's the same, and then the differences. And so here, this is a graphic organizer. You don't need to be, it's just for note taking. You don't need to write complete sentences. So in the similarity box, a good strategy would be to use bullet points to organize your similarities. And then for your differences, you would label cinder cone volcano here, shield volcano here, and then you're going to list your differences. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes to do that activity. All right. So another strategy to use in the science classroom would be writing to learn. So we write for many different purposes, and one way would be writing to learn, and that helps writing. That's when students would use writing to better understand and learn information that they read through summarizing, analyzing, and synthesizing. So this is a way for them, to go through their thoughts and it helps them process the information. Here's an example of a student's science notebook where the teacher, every day before they started their science lesson, would give a daily focus question. So it was a question to focus their thinking, and it was centered around, the topic that they were going to be studying. And so the teacher would ask a question, and the students would write and answer that question. And then what they would draw was a line of learning, which they would call the LOL. And then as they, progressed through the lesson or over multiple days or however long it took, then the students would go back and write what they learned. And so you could do this multiple times, going back to that same question and adding the learning that was done. And this is a way for them to process what they learned. Another strategy that would highly benefit our students, especially our English learners, would be providing the students with writing frames. These writing frames, they scaffold students' writing, and they help struggling writers organize their thoughts and transition from one idea to the next, so that they're not getting stuck on, how am I going to start my sentence, and the grammar of, those first phrases that they start with, the transition words. They're not getting stuck on that. They can use the writing frame, and then, they're focusing their writing more on the content and showing their thought processes when they have writing frames. And so here I have an example of a writing frame called a comparison contrast writing frame. And in this writing frame, the students are comparing and contrasting two things that they learned about, and so this helps them process the information. And so first they would start off with some comparison ideas. So the blank and the blank are the same because they both blank. So you're starting with how things are the same or similar. In addition, they both blank, and then they can add more details as needed. And over here I have some other sentence starters they can use, like they are also similar in, finally, they both. And then the students are going to explain how they're different. So they can compare, explain how the two things are different. And it gives them some words like use and, but, or whereas when they're contrasting. And so there's some sentence frames here like they are different because the blank, but the blank does not, also the blank, whereas the blank. And then some other ones over here would be another way they differ is blank has blank and blank has blank, and then finally. And so at the bottom of this graphic organizer, it says, remember to ask, will it be clear to the reader what I mean when I use pronouns such as they and it? If not, how can I edit the sentence to make it clearer? So that's a good something to work on, because for the students to work on, because in science text, they may not see those pronouns used, and so it would make more sense to use, the actual vocabulary that they're learning. And so what I would like you to do by yourself, you're going to use your box and T chart, what you learned about cinder cone volcanoes and shield volcanoes, your similarities and your differences, and you're going to use this compare and contrast writing frame to write sentences about what you learned. And this would be a strategy to help the students process it, and now, writing the information again, so their understanding of the two volcanoes is deeper and deeper. And so what I would like you to do is use these sentences if you feel like you can. If you have more ideas than just two comparisons and two differences, you can use these other sentence frames on the side. And then after we're done, we're going to be sharing our sentences, our writing, with a partner. So I'll give you about 5 minutes to do that. All right, so after the students write, we want them, to share their ideas with a partner. We've been working, I know, on a school very well with, accountable partner talk. So agreeing with, saying how their idea is similar to their partners or different to their partners, and in what way, being able to restate what their partner said, or a part of what their partner said. And so, and then sharing with the partner, that's helping them, take in that information more. And then as a teacher, I would also use the strategy we've been using through our academic vocabulary toolkit as a school, where we pre-select 2 students who are going to share their writing to the class. They're going to report, and then they're going to call on students at random in the class to restate what they said and compare their ideas. So this is giving the students another way to process the information, use the vocabulary words through speaking and collaboration with their peers. Right. Another writing strategy that I would like to share with you is for students to be creating science notebooks. Okay. To take ownership of it, it's fun to have the students decorate their science notebook. This is an example of a 3rd grade science notebook where the students looked at old National Geographic magazines, where they're able to rip out pictures, they used stickers, they decorated it. And that it makes it fun, and it helps them have ownership of their science notebook. And then they also made a title page And then this is an example of a tool for you to put into your notebooks, your students to put into their notebooks, that has what science notebooks do and what they don't. And so one that's really great here is that they don't erase or scratch out or add or scratch out old or wrong ideas. And that's true of scientists. When scientists, they're constantly, and I tell my students, scientists are constantly having things that they thought might happen, they're proven wrong. And so you don't want to erase or cross out, because you want to keep that thinking process that you went through. And that's what part of a scientist is. You learn from what you did before and what you did before. And so you want to keep those things there. You don't want to cross them out. So this would be some of the do's and don'ts that you can have into your science notebook. And then also keeping a table of contents of what you add in there with the date, the title, the page number, keeping your pages numbered so that then you can go back and you can refer to them throughout the school year on what you've learned. Some other examples would be putting your laboratory report, so any experiments and labs you do, having the students put their lab reports inside their notebook. This would be the place where they can keep their line of learnings for their focus questions. So a science notebook is a great tool to use and to help for the students to record their writing that they're doing in the science classroom and their learning. All right, so I want you to think about what we've learned, what we've talked about, what we've looked at, and some of the examples that I've given you of things that you can implement into your classroom. And I want you to pick one that you want to take away and you want to try in your classroom. All right, so that concludes my professional development on science disciplinary literacy, and I want to leave you off with just realizing and knowing that students need to experience science in a living, ongoing, exciting, and highly relevant way, and that science is a way to process and make sense of the world. And that students need to be taught explicitly how to observe, how to experiment, how to study, how to communicate, how to read and write like scientists, and how to use and know science technical vocabulary. So I hope that you feel that you've learned some ways that you can implement and strengthen vocabulary learning for your students through word walls, through Mystery Science, giving them hands-on experiences, through the criteria chart, the box and T chart, and the comparison contrasting writing frame, and how you can use that also for writing instruction and keeping science notebooks, which is a fun and interactive way, and that's what scientists do. They keep notebooks and record their experiments and what they're studying. And so I hope that you can implement one of those in your classrooms. Thank you very much for coming to my professional development, and I hope you're excited and feel eager to integrate something new into your science classroom.